Yes, I know you're probably looking at the title and thinking, oh great, someone is going to preach that this ship is real and insist that they kiss each other every night. But don't worry, my intention for this video is definitely not to force you to ship Wriothesley and Neuvillette and proclaim that this ship is 100% real and that even Hoyoverse is shipping them. Obviously, if you're not fond of this ship or other queer ships in the game, that's your choice, and you can opt not to watch this video if you dislike them that much. No hard feelings. Without outright canon confirmation, shipping is but an interpretation, and you can decide to view certain interactions between characters as either romantic or platonic. That's totally fine. The reason why I wanted to cover this ship after remaining sorta ship neutral for a while on my channel is just, well, I kinda wanted to explore new content, and I think some aspects of their interactions take a bit of effort to understand, since it can give us some insight on how two former outcasts have successfully navigated Fontaine society, even to the point of managing parts of it. So today I'm going to try to go through the lore of Wriothesley and Neuvillette's interactions, outline the history of the ship's development, detail some clashing opinions about the ship, as well as go through both romantic and non-romantic interpretations of canonically stated facts about their relationship. I do know this video is probably gonna appeal mostly to people who already ship them, so I won't try to sound that persuasive here anymore. I will also say right now that I'm going to refer to them as Rylette rather than Wriothesley, because it just sounds much better, and those particular dynamics don't matter in this video anyway. Also, before I get into the analysis, if you're intrigued with the idea of piecing together character lore details, then you might want to consider subscribing to my channel where I do lots of work like that. Before I go into Rylette specifically, I'd like to briefly touch on the queer fandom's shipping patterns when it comes to pairing up characters of the same gender. In a cast of over 70 playable characters, there are numerous networks of interactions between them as implied by their voice lines about each other. However, you will often find two characters who are often drawn to each other in multiple scenarios, appearing side by side in events and paired together in official fan art. It gets to the point where they seem almost inseparable as best friends, and this leads you to believe in their shipping potential. It could be that some fans believe that them being best friends is like a euphemism for them dating, or some fans might acknowledge that because of them originating as best friends who understand each other in such a way that others don't, it makes them viable romantic partners. Aside from that, there's also this idea that each country has some iconic national couples which prove to be the most prominent queer ships arising from the region, and the expectation is often that succeeding nations will also have their national couples eventually. These national couples often consist of two tall female characters and two tall male characters, or in some instances, two short adult females and two short adult males. But those are oftentimes less popular. The reason why these sorts of pairings follow this format is because having the same character model usually indicates that these characters are peers or equals who often interact with each other. That's why even before two characters' personalities are revealed, if they are already shown to be both tall and both of the same gender, then they are likely to be shipped right off the bat. It's a reaction to previous examples and follows the assumption that Hoyoverse will continue previously established patterns, although some would argue that these patterns aren't as strict or as consistent as they seem. Although there were a lot of leaks about the only two tall male characters in Fontaine, what truly convinced lots of fans to get on board was the Overture teaser released in early July of 2023, which named the voice actors of some of the newly revealed Fontaine characters that players who followed leaks weren't all that surprised to see. Fans found out through this official reveal that Hiroshi Kamiya and Daisuke Ono were the voice actors of Neuvillette and Wriothesley respectively, and gave the quote-unquote fujoshis more fuel to ship these two characters, considering these voice actors have often played gay or implied gay pairings in previous roles. I didn't know this, by the way, because I play in the Korean dub actually, and while I was not exactly sold with the ship yet, I was worried that if Hoyoverse did indeed decide to put these two characters in many scenes together as indicated by the casting decision, I would get pissed off if I didn't like this pairing. So I told myself, fine, since I like Neuvillette all the way back from when he was mentioned in Nahida's Jip marketing, I'll support whoever he wants to spend time with, just so I won't get pissed if Hoiverse actually gives this pairing some good moments. At first, the reason why I didn't really like this ship back in June was because Wriothesley's leaks made him look really smug, and I didn't want to pair Neuvillette with such a guy who would probably stress him out. Enemies to lovers isn't my thing, after all. But in the Overture teaser, I could see how conscientious Wriothesley looked as he was perusing the reports, and the way Sigewinne seemed fond of him was so endearing. Because of this, I officially approved of him and started crafting headcanons of him and Neuvillette based on the fact that a judge and a warden make up different aspects of the justice system, so they could probably teach each other to view criminals and the concept of justice differently. However, the majority of their fans still put them in some sort of cat and dog scenarios, with Wriothesley teasing Neuvillette to no end. Meanwhile, fans of other ships, whether queer or not, were very highly skeptical of this ship, considering we didn't know yet if they would actually interact in canon or not. After all, certain ships did arise from false predictions, such as Shenhe and Yelan, who fans thought would interact but have never spoken to or about each other, as well as A and Sarah, who were assumed to have a closer relationship than they actually did in canon, where A was much more involved with Yarimiko. On the other hand, some characters that were shipped before they appeared together did turn out to have lots of interactions together in canon, ships such as Sino and Tignari, as well as Navia and Clorand. Still, certain fans found the act of shipping two tall men just because they were both attractive guys rather shallow and missed the point of shipping national ships in Genshin, because national ships should arise from repeated canon interactions. I guess some people also felt sick of the standard quote-unquote fujoshi practice of overly obsessing over two guys just because it might indicate an obsession with the male gender to an odd degree. But then again, there's no real issue with shipping characters who haven't interacted, since it's standard fandom practice. Like, people even ship characters from entirely different franchises, you know. Plus, I did argue at the time that there was a high chance that the judge and the warden would interact in canon, given the possible discussions and insights that could arise from such an arrangement. I even made a non-shippy speculation video about them before Fontaine was released, talking about the potential connections between the court and the prison. And I was right in a few aspects, but mistaken in stating that Neuvillette would likely inspect the fortress of Meripede. Still, if people can make crazy lore theories, then why couldn't fans speculate that two characters would interact, right? Well, regardless, this relatively innocent fandom behavior ended up unintentionally ruining the ship's reputation, as you will see later. Until 4.1, we could only really guess about Wriothesley and Neuvillette interacting, save for a few leaks about their voice lines about each other, which, oh boy, that's something we have to discuss later on. But still, those were just two pieces of crumbs. Not enough to really make them seem as established as a gay ship, like, Hytham and Kaveh, who literally live together. However, the live stream did give us a bit of hope about their interactions by giving us this piece of art of Wriothesley visiting Neuvillette's office when the gift codes were displayed. That didn't really seem like much because, well, it could just be a marketing scheme to get us to pull for the both of them, right? There were also worries of them entering a conflict with each other because in English, the line, "Is this what justice means to you? Answer me, Neuvillette," sort of sounded like Wriothesley's voice, but in Korean, they were vastly different, so I knew right away that he wasn't the one who said that. The very next day, the version preview page came out and it featured art of Wriothesley meeting Neuvillette again, but this time at night, proving that the art in the livestream was far from being a one-off. And combined with the leaks of Wriothesley's voice line about Neuvillette, this did confirm that they sometimes meet to discuss business in Neuvillette's office, showing that they do in fact interact at least a little bit. This did indeed give shippers more hope, but until the patch dropped, it was all just circumstantial evidence. When the 4.1 Archon quest finally dropped, the iconic cutscene of Clorand and Wriothesley halting the flow of primordial seawater and Neuvillette coming to rescue became a huge hit to all fans because of how inherently exciting and action-filled it was. For Rylot fans, this scene had a bit more significance because of how Wriothesley reacted to Neuvillette's arrival, looking as if he was pleased, grinning in such a way he never usually does. Some would even suggest that he was checking Neuvillette out, but as much as it triggered butterflies to go haywire in the stomachs of Rylot shippers, this scene wasn't enough to convince the ship's avid deniers. Well, obviously you'd expect that people who aren't fond of queer ships wouldn't see the appeal, but a YouTube short comparing the iconic Beiguang Lantern Rite scene and the Rylot Archon quest scene revealed that this wasn't the full story. If you look at some of the comments, you'd notice that a few people who did view Beidou and Ningguang's interaction as flirting didn't hold the same view for Rylot, citing that Wriothesley was only teasing or mocking Neuvillette or getting him to spill the beans about his true identity. An argument was that Beidou was directly complimenting Ningguang's appearance while Wriothesley didn't compliment that about Neuvillette, which God forbid people flirt differently. I mean, not everyone wants their appearance to be complimented. And another thing that was raised was the way Neuvillette didn't seem to flirt back or something. I mean, bro is nervous and also not naturally flirty. What do you want him to do? He was literally about to push back lethal water. Obviously, his mind was occupied. That doesn't exactly mean he was uninterested automatically. Also, going back to the idea of Wriothesley either teasing, mocking, or prodding Neuvillette, well, firstly, teasing and flirting are not mutually exclusive, right? As for mocking, that doesn't seem to be the case if you piece together literally everything Wriothesley has said about Neuvillette, because he only has pure admiration for Neuvillette's demeanor, work ethic, and character. I also doubt that Wriothesley was intent on sussing out Neuvillette, considering he quickly dropped his suspicions and explained Neuvillette's ability to solve the crisis by way of him having a strong sense of responsibility. He knew something was up, but he dropped the allegations himself out of respect. The way I interpret this scene is that Wriothesley intends to give Neuvillette a vote of confidence to counter Clorand's worry over him. The situation was insanely nerve-wracking, and piling worry on top of that is only gonna worsen Neuvillette's anxiety. Wriothesley probably sensed that Neuvillette needed to know how fully he was trusted, how impressive his actions were, and how much he was expected to succeed. This is reinforced by the little bet that Wriothesley and Clorand made when Clorand predicted that Neuvillette would bring reinforcements while Wriothesley predicted otherwise, and he ended up being correct. This highlights his belief that Neuvillette could push back the primordial seawater entirely on his own because that's just how capable he is. It's not necessarily Wriothesley checking Neuvillette out, and even if some of his remarks may seem flirtatious to some, I don't think he was expecting Neuvillette to respond anyway. It's more of just a way to cheer him on. And that's why I think that while I heavily disagree with the comments under that comparison vid, I don't entirely agree with the idea that the Beiguang scene and the Rylot scene were equivalent, because the Beiguang scene does give you a good idea of their true relationship dynamic with the push and pull, stuff like that. Meanwhile, if you watched this Fontaine Archon Quest cutscene alone, you wouldn't be able to accurately infer the true dynamic of Rylot's interactions. Instead, the scene that would best represent the pattern of Rylot interactions would be this 2-minute scene of them chatting in Neuvillette's story quest. Watching the scene alone pretty much equips you to understand their dynamic thoroughly. Please skip this section if you haven't played Neuvillette's story quest, by the way. But in summary, his quest starts off with him finding out that Kiara, a Melusine from the Marechaussee Phantom, received a death threat, prompting Neuvillette to investigate the threat as soon as possible due to his past trauma of encountering similar threats due to Fontainians who were distrustful of both him and the creatures he brought into the city. Neuvillette assumed that this death threat was a way of hurting him out of their frustration towards him. Eventually, we do apprehend the suspect, who was already in jail, and Wriothesley had Sigewin send him to a detention center within the fortress of Meripede. But here's the thing. Wriothesley pointed out that although this was a real threat against both the Melusines and Neuvillette, it's no longer representative of the popular opinion about him. Wriothesley proceeds to comfort Neuvillette by reminding him of how much the public trusts him, going so far as to say that he's shaped Fontaine into what it is today, meaning that he isn't an outsider anymore and has evolved into becoming the symbol of justice. But beyond just stating Neuvillette's reputation, he goes as far as to investigate Vautrin, a guard from when Neuvillette first took his post as the Chief Justice, who was convicted by him for avenging the death of Carol, his Melusine friend, in a violent manner. Although he initially seemed to be resentful of Neuvillette during the trial, Wriothesley discerned that he was just putting up an act to highlight how impartial Neuvillette was in judging his friend, and that Vautrin didn't oppose his imprisonment one bit. Well, yes, it just seems like Wriothesley is praising Neuvillette in a way most Fontainians would. He's really the only character who can truly deliver the feedback to Neuvillette in this exact manner due to how close they are, which I will expand on in the next section. Many people feel intimidated around Neuvillette or don't really think he needs reassurance, but Wriothesley is able to pinpoint Neuvillette's insecurities and make them melt away like a level 1 cryo slime hit with Futau's burst. Aside from that, he's in the most unique position to give this feedback because he's the only person who has been convicted by Neuvillette who also ended up becoming close to him. No one else who was convicted by the Iudex ever got to form a personal relationship with him afterwards, and no one who is close to him got the chance to be judged by him in court, aside from Vautrin. Thus, it's only Wriothesley who can really represent the deep trust that some convicts have in Neuvillette despite receiving a guilty verdict from him. This goes to show how highly regarded he is that even prisoners admire him, especially those from the mutual aid network that Vautrin established. If that doesn't let Neuvillette know how well he does his job, then I don't know what would. Although this does only seem to speak to Wriothesley's admiration for Neuvillette, it looks like Neuvillette regards Wriothesley high enough to trust his feedback, and as I said, they are close enough for Wriothesley to even dare say this to the Iudex, who is normally considered unapproachable. The fact that Neuvillette allows himself to be vulnerable and accept comfort at this moment says a lot, really. Because of reasons I mentioned earlier, Wriothesley seems to be the only possible person who could deliver these lines to Neuvillette at this moment, and that does highlight their special relationship of mutual trust, whether romantic or not. Now, at this point, you probably think I'm gonna make this whole unhinged spiel combining crumbs we have for this ship, or individual bits of lore that, when added up together, serve as the so-called basis of the ship. These can be statements about each other, special canonical interactions, or symbolisms ranging from colors to design, official fan art, and what have you. But you can probably find that easily online on Twitter or maybe even YouTube, since my fellow Rylot shippers are very detailed analysts. Or you could just find the details yourself because these are easily available in certain quests or character profiles. So instead of me trying to point out or break down each and every detail that could feed into the ship, what I want to offer you instead is a sort of framework to interpret these bits of information about the relationship. Basically, I have identified 3 overarching themes that you can find throughout Wriothesley and Neuvillette's interactions, and these are 1. High regard, 2. Mutual trust, and 3. Exceptions they make for each other. And hopefully these 3 themes will help you better make sense of their current lore so that it won't just seem like scattered bits of information. Usually, when you say that someone is good at their job, this just means that they perform their required tasks well, in that they complete all their work before the required deadline with little to no mistakes. Let's say if you're an accountant, you made sure that all the values entered are correct and the accounts are balanced, plus you're able to submit your report on the date you were asked to. However, for some other jobs, it's not simply enough to be accurate and timely. there's also a relational component which requires you to deal with other people properly. For instance, if you're a doctor, it's not good enough for you to cure many patients, but also to display kindness towards them and explain their ailments well to put them at ease. But aside from just accuracy, timeliness, and pleasantness, lots of jobs also require a person to have a strong sense of integrity, meaning that they uphold ethical conduct in their professions, even if they could potentially gain more wealth and power from doing shady stuff. So, when you say that someone is a truly excellent and ideal leader, especially in a government setting, it's not just a testament to the quality of their work, but to the rest of their character as well. It implies that they possess the qualities of competence, agreeableness, all at the same time, painting them as truly admirable individuals. Of course, those people hardly exist in real life in government settings, but when we do think of our ideal leaders, these traits come to mind. And some of them do manifest in leaders of non government institutions like schools, businesses, communities, etc. Anyway, so what's my point here? It's no secret that Wriothesley and Neuvillette regard each other highly in professional scenarios. I did recount to you what happened in Neuvillette's story quest, which depicted Wriothesley praising Neuvillette to high heavens about him being a symbol of justice and all. Then, as for the other way around, Neuvillette also expressed praise for Wriothesley in his voice lines about him, and even went as far as to take credit for advocating for Wriothesley's reception of the title of Duke, a noble title reserved only for distinguished citizens of Fontaine who possess extraordinary merit. In some sense, this can also count as a political belief because the way they advocate for each other does come across as a sort of stance regarding their approval of the people in power, and it entails their active and undying support for the incumbent Iudex and the incumbent prison administrator. The politics is more notable regarding Neuvillette arranging Wriothesley's instatement as a duke, considering he had a criminal past. Like, I'm not sure if this is completely canon, but my interpretation of why Neuvillette had to fight for Wriothesley's reputation was because people probably didn't approve of the idea that an ex-convict should be worthy of such national recognition. So I think through this scenario, Neuvillette was able to assert his beliefs about granting opportunities and power to ex-convicts. And through that, it's like his high regard for Wriothesley probably contributed to his views on ex-convicts, just as Wriothesley's high regard for Neuvillette allowed him to trust the justice system once again. Going back to the idea of praising someone for how well they do their job, it does seem like an entirely professional opinion on both ends, yet because they're both leaders in either government or quasi-government settings who also work somewhat closely with one another, you can start to see how their views about each other go beyond being comments about their work to being comments about their personhood as a whole, believing that the other possesses desirable and virtuous characteristics. It goes from saying Neuvillette is a good judge or Wriothesley is a good warden to Neuvillette is a good person or Wriothesley is a good person. And all of that sets the stage for them seeing eye to eye and having a lot of respect for one another. This goes beyond simply having a good opinion of each other, and it ends up translating into their great trust in one another. As in previous examples, Wriothesley was extremely confident in Neuvillette's ability to halt the flow of primordial seawater, and Neuvillette gave Wriothesley the freedom to decide how to properly administer punishment to the guy who sent the death threat to Kiara. Because they believe in each other's inherent goodness, they're also able to rely on one another and take each other's words to heart. At this point, it's not hard to see why these two people would gravitate towards each other, especially when they feel their burdens being eased in the other's presence. Their work dynamic is very cooperative despite them also not getting in the way of each other's autonomy, and I think you can even describe the relationship as being symbiotic and synergistic, even if their playstyles aren't. Of course, this is just their work dynamic, but with the trust they already developed in that setting, it suddenly isn't so strange to consider the idea of confiding in and reassuring one another, even with personal concerns. Anyway, you do rely on them a lot already, right? That's why you'll begin to notice them behaving towards each other in a way that seems distinct from the way they treat everyone else. This is probably the most crucial aspect of the relationship if you're an avid shipper, because oftentimes romantic partners are people you give special treatment to. And whether you ship Rylot or not, I assure you that the special treatment is there. For one, Neuvillette tells us twice at the start of Act 3 of the Fontaine Archon quest that he has a personal relationship with Wriothesley. Of course, what that entails could be up to interpretation, but what we do know about personal relationships when it comes to Neuvillette is that they're extremely rare. Neuvillette himself says that he doesn't really form them, especially not with people belonging to prominent factions in Fontaine, because he has to keep his impartiality. Yet when it comes to Wriothesley, he openly declares that he has a personal relationship with him. Twice! It's like his own rules fly out the window when it comes to him. But I mean, yeah, that's why it's an exception. In my view, I surmise that a part of the reason why Neuvillette feels comfortable with forming a personal relationship with Wriothesley is because he convicted him before already, so he doesn't need to be worried about, oh, what happens if the time comes that he commits a crime? Will I be able to remain impartial? Because, it already happened. But aside from that, the high regard and the mutual trust also make him inclined to pursue this close relationship. It's also not just on Neuvillette's end, but on Wriothesley's end as well. He noticeably acts differently around Neuvillette. He drops his intimidating and somewhat snarky persona in favor of speaking more gently and sincerely to match Neuvillette's vibe. And although he doesn't give up joking completely, he doesn't seem to direct his teasing towards Neuvillette, at least not in a way that would make him the butt of the joke. Other than that, he seems to show different expressions around Neuvillette, like in that famous cutscene where he smirked at the idea of Neuvillette acting as Fontaine's savior, and in their Lantern Rite interaction, which I will expound on later. Wriothesley also smiled very fondly and cutely with his eyes closed, so that's definitely something. So with the flow I established, you can sort of see how this all happened. You have two persons who consider each other to possess an exceptional character, and that leads them to have an exceptional level of trust in one another, and that gives rise to an exceptional relationship, that which holds a unique kind of importance over their usual interactions with other people. And when you categorize their lore bits and interactions into these three themes, you'll start to understand the bigger picture surrounding the relationship they have. I will admit it does seem less obvious on the surface because it's not like they completely give up their formal speech or start giggling and calling each other sweet endearments, but you will notice the unique status of their relationship once you observe their interactions with each other, which can be characterized as easygoing, heartwarming, and encouraging. Aside from that, you will notice that they have a unique relationship simply by listening to what the goddamn Udix has told us twice. It really isn't as hidden or as non-existent as some people say it is. Which brings us to my next point. It is quite normal for a lot of character relationships or even character personalities to be subject to misinterpretations, or at least, if these interpretations aren't wrong, they're a bit subpar. Basically, it's like the audience's skill issue when it comes to understanding narratives. An example would be Kaveh's and Hytham's conversation at the end of Hytham's story quest, which made some fans view Hytham as kinda offensive or degrading towards Kaveh because of his bluntness. That sort of interpretation likely comes from taking certain words at face value or failing to cross-check certain quotes with other stuff the character has said or done previously. As annoying as it is, you can sort of understand why fans would think that, because maybe they're not well versed in the study of Hytham and Kaveh, since that requires lots of deep dives into character stories, bulletin boards, etc. Every ship or character is bound to run into bad takes from the fandom, so it's not necessarily worth stressing over all the time. However, the problem with Rylot is not just misinterpretation, but also misinformation to some degree. The number of people that say they barely interacted is wild, and that's just downright false. And not only is it false, it's easy to verify that it's false. Their haters act like the only scene they had together was the cutscene where Wriothesley said wow to Neuvillette, as if the entire conversation in Neuvillette's story quest didn't happen. And it's a heart-to-heart talk too, so it doesn't make sense that even after the story quest was released way back in September 2023, people still argued that they barely interacted at all. I get if they said that back in August, but anyone who says that in November onwards is either ignorant or lying. I mean, I do get that there were only a few interactions that occurred between them on screen, but the fact that Neuvillette said he and Wriothesley have a personal relationship means they've had several off-screen interactions, and their character stories and voice lines will also tell you this, but I don't really expect most people to read those anyway. I mean, it is genuinely fine for you to just not like the ship, not understand its chemistry. Maybe the butterflies in your stomach die when you see them together on screen. That's totally valid, but you can't just say something that's downright false. I know the whole they don't interact allegation has died down significantly since Lantern, right? But it was such a rampant claim in the fandom late last year, and it was quite a stressful time for us shippers because it felt like our own senses were being put into question. Like, bro, did we play the same quest? Neuvillette literally said he had a personal relationship with Wriothesley, and so many fans still had to insist that they were just co-workers with no actual connection. And it was really strange seeing Rylette shippers post the same screenshot of Neuvillette's line over and over again just for the same stupid allegations to come up repeatedly. To reiterate, you can view the personal relationship as either platonic or romantic. That's fine, but you can't say they're not close because closeness is part of the literal definition of a personal relationship. Of course, we could have easily blocked these people who were hating on our ship, but they kept popping up again and again in around November to December. I'm glad though that it's not so much of a problem anymore, but being in Genshin fandom spaces was quite stressful at that time. What I find kinda unfortunate about the misinformation I described is that I feel like it led to lots of fans ignoring some genuinely important Fontaine lore just because they disliked a certain ship to the point that they likely overlooked lots of non-shippy but important interactions between the characters involved. And the thing about Wriothesley and Neuvillette in particular is that they're two characters that reveal a lot about important institutions in the world building. Like, the Knights of Favonius has so many playable characters that they can each help you paint a picture of how the overall institution works. But in this case, Neuvillette is pretty much the only playable character that gives you an insight into how judicial and administrative processes in Fontaine work, aside from the duels, of course. And Wriothesley is the only playable character that lets us know how the prison is run, which is something that we don't normally get to understand in other media or in real life. So when they interact, you get such a unique look into the relationship between the Palais Mermonia and the Fortress of Meripede. And although the fortress is autonomous, they still cooperate closely with the court. Autonomous just means they don't receive strict directives or heavy regulation. It doesn't mean these two institutions have absolutely nothing to do with each other. A pretty interesting lore bit I'd like to recount would be their two character promotion web events which came out before their debut banners. You know, the ones that give 40 primos. It was pretty interesting because I don't think we've ever had two characters with web events with interconnected plot lines aside from these two. Anyway, Neuvillette's web event had 3 scenarios with 2 alternate realities each. The third one involved Aife, the Melusine, handing him a document from the Fortress of Meripede, with one reality being that Wriothesley had submitted a price list, which I think is the summary of the Gardamek orders from the fortress, and the alternative reality being that Wriothesley had submitted a resignation letter. And you could see the great difference in the reactions of Neuvillette. When he received the resignation letter, he seemed disappointed with the lack of explanation from Wriothesley about ending their collaboration, so it's like he felt bad that they will no longer get to work together. Meanwhile, when he received a price list, he was pleased with the clarity of its presentation, indicating how Wriothesley makes his work life easier with his high efficiency. On the flip side, Wriothesley's web event involved him doing an inspection of the Gardamek production volume in the fortress, and at the end he had to submit a document to Aife, and there were 3 choices. One being a resignation letter, and the other being the price list. So it's a direct callback to Neuvillette's web event. And when you select resignation letter, Wriothesley looks pissed, so it really goes to show that they both appreciate their cooperation at work and find it to be mutually beneficial. Through interactions like these, we get a bit of a glimpse into how the fortress of Meripede has improved under Wriothesley's watch, and how that extends not only to the prisoners but also to the Palermo, especially because they send some of their guards to work at the fortress. Even a retired guard recounted to us how difficult it was to manage prisoners during his time before the new administrator, aka Wriothesley, came in. So we can see the broader extent of the benefits of Wriothesley's governance, and if we were to extrapolate, he can set a precedent for future administrators to continue the reforms. I would consider that to be very interesting societal level lore for Fontaine, as in showing us how the nation systems work. So I think that Neuvillette and Wriothesley's relationship is worth paying attention to even if you don't see them in a romantic light, and it's quite unfortunate that some players are too hate-filled to see the greater importance of their relationship. Their relationship is so good that their work efficiency improves their trust in each other, which also improves the quality of their work. At this point, you can say that this relationship is genuinely beneficial for Fontaine citizens. It's also funny how they really do try to preserve the autonomy of each other's institutions, like how Neuvillette really had to go through the effort of commissioning the Traveler to investigate the fortress just so he wouldn't need to pull strings by asking Wriothesley directly, because yeah, that would be very authoritative of him. So yeah, you could see the dynamics of what things they are allowed and not allowed to cooperate on, and that gives you an idea of systemic national processes. However, I do understand why the ship may not be for everyone, and I will list some of the reasons why I think Riolet didn't really hit hard, even for some existing queer ship fans. Basically, it just boils down to differences in preferences, but I want to sort of make some more detailed hypotheses surrounding that, because while it is my favorite ship in Genshin, it does have some elements in it that aren't easy to approach, I guess. Firstly, the ship is the type where the characters get along so well, and their wavelengths are pretty much aligned, as I have shown in my previous analysis. But this often manifests in work harmony, which may not easily register to people as romantic. While office romances aren't unheard of, I think people tend to think of it as like couples sneaking around to kiss in the file storage room. I mean, kisses aren't depicted in Genshin either way, but taking time off work is seen as something necessary in an office romance, as opposed to focusing on the work aspect of the relationship. Violet really is the type of ship that puts the office in office romance, and the way they speak with each other can come across as very formal and procedural at times, which goes against some people's idea of romantic interactions. It does take some effort to understand the process through which a harmonious work relationship can translate into a meaningful connection, and that requires fans to really look into how both of these characters value their work and to think about how well they execute their tasks. Aside from that, you have to not take their language use at face value, because some people hear formal speak and immediately have this bias that romantic partners don't talk to each other like that, even though some might do that. Secondly, while fandom participants also value calmer relationships where the characters get along perfectly, overall they do seem to be less appreciated as opposed to dramatic pairs with sizzling sexual tension. That's why enemies to lovers or opposites attract tropes are quite popular. Or even if a ship doesn't fall under those categories, fans might appreciate ships where the characters have journeyed together and have had some dramatic, possibly life or death moments, something like that. Things which give the ship more spice, so to speak. When a ship gets along too well, fans might perceive this to be boring, and that's commonly used as a criticism against Riolet. Combined with their conversations involving work, some may struggle to see these two's chemistry, so to speak. Although fans are very used to interpreting the enemies to lovers dynamic, like they know how to sense the care beneath the irritation, things like that, they might not have many examples to refer to when it comes to analyzing two characters who speak formally at work. But they don't realize that seeing how well a couple can give each other advice and comfort each other in unique ways is also interesting, as it reveals their unique understanding of each other that not many people can replicate. Thirdly, in connection with the first two, Wriothesley and Neuvillette have this unique approach to their relationship, which involves giving the other space. Space to recollect their thoughts, space to work without interference, things like that. And I think the idea of doing that kind of goes against typical romantic notions. Usually, the romantic script would tell us that if you truly like someone romantically, you're going to want to be around them as often as possible. But this discounts other motivations a person might have in interacting with their crush. Perhaps you might want to show your appreciation for them by giving them more freedom or independence because you do see the value in that. Both Wriothesley and Neuvillette have expressed not wanting to interfere in the other's work, especially because they know how important that is to the other person. Although it seems like a form of avoidance or rejection on the surface, their thought process shows that they're mainly concerned for the other's well-being and autonomy, and they want to respect that. They're not just leaving the other person be because they don't like their company. And there are also quite a few times when they reach out to each other, but these are more off-screen aside from the Lantern Rite flashback. Lastly, I think another barrier to appreciating Violet might lie in Wriothesley himself as a character because he's rather complex, nuanced, and has such unique living circumstances that he becomes quite difficult to relate to. Some people say that shipping boils down to pairing a character that you project onto with a character that's your ideal type. I don't agree with that actually, and that's not how I or many people ship. But shipping may require you to put yourself in the shoes of the characters involved so you can properly understand their motivations for falling in love with each other. It's easier to write for characters you can sort of think or act similarly to, or someone you'd want to live vicariously through. However, with Wriothesley, his trauma is way too deep and unusual for any of us to find relatable in a major way. His personality is also very refined, intimidating, and has a lot of insights about life. So I don't think it's that easy for people to see themselves in him. I think the key to really identifying with him more thoroughly involves understanding his vision and leadership wisdom, which requires fans to be more analytic than usual. Neuvillette is a little bit more relatable with his social awkwardness, but he's also the type that seems to also be wise and distant. I think he also is widely loved by fans for his power, intelligence, and benevolence, that he's almost seen as this perfect person because of those factors that I went through just now. I did see a lot of fandom takes about how they can imagine Wriothesley having an unrequited love for Neuvillette. And I guess this comes from the fact that the WoW scene was so popular, and Wriothesley often praises Neuvillette to high heavens, especially in his story quest, right? Then in contrast, Neuvillette doesn't want to spend too much time in the Fortress of Meropide and prefers to dip out and go to the surface as soon as possible, right? I can definitely see why people do see that sort of dynamic, but they didn't really take note of how Neuvillette is deeply concerned about making Wriothesley's job easy for him, how he provided the most complimentary testimony on him, and how he appeared extremely pleased to see Wriothesley wearing a vision. Oh, and did I mention for the nth time, he said he and Wriothesley have a personal relationship, which he also hardly forms with anyone. If people were just more open to seeing different expressions of concern and affection, or different relationship dynamics, then they would see that Wriothesley and Neuvillette have pretty much a perfectly reciprocal dynamic, whether platonic or romantic. Based on a deeper analysis of their interactions and beliefs about one another, especially with the three themes I described earlier, you'd notice that the way they view each other aligns extremely well, so I don't think one regards the other more highly than they are regarded by the other. It's pretty much well matched. With all that said, there is a single best argument in support of the idea that Neuvillette cherishes Wriothesley a lot in return, and that's just the scene during the 2024 Lantern Rite. It established their close connection so well that I think the haters have either shut up, or if they still continue to be annoying, they sound a lot more stupid. And of course, they can no longer say their usual barely interact line. Previously, I have said that giving someone space or prioritizing work in a relationship can be healthy and mature, but are also not perceived as romantic by default. Gift giving, however, that's very traditionally romantic. So there, finally, at least some people can see where we're coming from now, I guess. What's even better about the gifts that Neuvillette gave is that he took into account Wriothesley's specific interests, with him being a tea addict. The legal codex was also a reference to the group banter they had with Clorand in the Archon quest, showing that Neuvillette really keeps in mind the little less things that Wriothesley says, and now he wants to deepen the relationship by reinforcing the inside joke, since inside jokes often indicate a unique bond, since only the small group of people will understand it. He wanted the gifts to have a very deep meaning that Wriothesley will cherish forever, and he seems so proud of it too. So yeah, this pretty much shows that they are close. I mean, Neuvillette came across as some kind of schoolgirl in the shoujo anime, giving her crush something for Valentine's or something. Although, of course, that's a strictly romantic interpretation. Every now and then, of course, you'll still find people saying that the relationship as depicted in the Lantern Rite scene was just the type that coworkers have, but it just comes across as more stupid since while it is normal for coworkers to give each other gifts, it's not very normal to give gifts pretty much only to them and to invoke an inside joke and feel thrilled that the other person remembered it. Like if you do that for your coworker, they must at least be your ultimate favorite coworker that you've struck a deep friendship with already. Do people still think that you can't have close relationships with your coworkers outside of work? Well, anyway, as I said, those arguments are no longer that bothersome because at least old pieces of misinformation are not circulated that much anymore. And I think this scene has led some people to consider the ship's merits more closely. Look, as I keep saying, you really don't have to ship these two, and my point is not to convince you to do so, but rather I'm just expressing how I wish people respected it more even if they didn't like it. And of course, if you watched this video, you probably like the ship already. So what I wanted to do was to make you feel more pleased and grateful about getting on board the ship even though the fandom gave us a lot of flack, even from people we didn't expect it from. I guess I wanted to highlight how deep connections can come in different forms, and even if they don't manifest in tropes or scenarios we're used to, these dynamics can still be mutually enriching to both parties involved. In a sense, Rylot depicts how two social outcasts found their way into the public sphere as national leaders and how they serve as each other's source of strength, and hope that the justice system still carries its integrity. It truly is a special and heartwarming tale that I hope fans would appreciate regardless of shipping tendencies, as it really speaks to the idea of fulfilling your purpose with someone who knows how to best support you. If you like this video, please do check out my other content to see if something will interest you. Perhaps you could consider subscribing to the channel to further support it, and if you are friends with a bunch of Rylot shippers, I hope you could send this to them in case they'd be interested in such an unreasonably long ramble about our favorite ship. Although I won't tackle ship content in the future, I think I really do value character analysis, so I hope that aligns with your interests as well. That's all for today, and I'll catch you in my next video.